Again, a very warm welcome to everybody who has come to support Mike getting baptized. We really appreciate it, particularly if this is not your normal context. You're really welcome. I'm just going to invite you to do something specific, if that's okay, and it's up to you whether you do it. But I'm going to invite you to listen to this with your heart. I don't want to bypass people's minds, ever, but I think this is one for the heart. So let's take a couple of moments, maybe. If you want to listen to something with your heart, maybe this would be it. As we know, homelessness is one of the great social problems of our time. From 2010 to 17, there was a 28% increase in the number of homeless people, and the young and members of the LGBT plus community are disproportionately represented. In these two categories, many who live on the streets have been forced to the conclusion it's better for them to have nowhere definite to go than to stay where they are. And what I would like to do is to read a story of Jesus about homelessness. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I'll set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf, kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And so they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the elder son was in the field, and when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The elder brother became angry and refused to go in. His father went out and pleaded with him, but he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" This is actually the tale of 2 sons who are homeless. Where is your true home? Where's your true home? If I asked you that, where's your true home? Where's your place of rest? Augustine of Hippo, one of the history's great theologians, said, "You have made us for yourself, Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in you." You've made us for yourself, Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in you. And he expresses the idea that because we've been made by God, it's impossible to be truly at home in our own skin that he has made, until we are at home or at rest with God. The Christian claim is that God longs to have a consistent, healthy, intimate, parent-child relationship with us. In the Gospels from which this reading was taken, short accounts of Jesus' life written by his disciples, Jesus uniquely describes God as his Abba, or Daddy. And he actually speaks a lot about his relationship with God. He says, for instance, "I only do what I see my Father doing. I and my Father are one. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Whatever the Father does, the Son does also. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. Jesus enjoys an unprecedented relationship of love and trust with God his Father. And when Jesus was baptized, his Father is heard to proclaim, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." This then is the supreme example of a reciprocal relationship of love between a father and a son. Christians say it's possible for anyone who comes to the Son to experience a relationship with the Father, God the Father, characterized by this same kind of confidence and intimacy. But the story of the homeless boys tells us it's equally possible to be miles and miles away from God the Father. According to Jesus, we have each been created to know him and to fulfill a unique role within his purposes during our life. And some of us don't know anything about this at all, just never even heard it. And many young people in the UK have never been to church, not one time. And if we have been, it might have been a formal occasion like a wedding or something, a baptism. And there are other people who have heard it but aren't currently that interested in God's kingdom because they're busy building their own thingdom or having any number of flingdoms. Some take a conscious decision to leave the whole idea of God behind, to relegate issues of faith to the realm of childhood, and to attempt to assume control of their lives, the direction of their lives, probably because they think that if God was to get involved, he might get in the way of some of the things we want to do. So like the first son in the story who hits his father with a demand for his share of the family inheritance, now thereby treating his father as though he's already dead, he takes the money and runs and blows it all on pleasure and the fulfillment of any and every desire. And I don't think he's the last child to have done this, is he? Some of us are true burners of the candle at both ends, living for the weekend and exploring anything on offer on the London scene. So, if you're not such a person, do you think that people like that usually feel empty, disillusioned, restless? What do you think? I don't think they normally do. Not while the party's going on. But experience says that one day they almost certainly will. This is the message proclaimed by virtually anyone who's lived by the pressure principle for long enough. Of course, there are always exceptions, but countless celebs and cultural icons tell us that at some point on the ride, they become desperate to identify a meaning to their lives beyond the pursuit of success and excess. The first son discovers when his funds are gone in a time of crisis that his so-called friends are just going to leave him, and they leave him on the streets with no food. So he ends up doing the most menial job a Jewish boy could possibly do, which is to feed pigs, which are ritually unclean animals. In the end, he becomes so desperate that he longs to eat their swill, but nobody will give him anything. And so son number one hits rock bottom. And some of us, like this boy, only face the reality of what our lives have become when we hit some kind of disaster or crisis. We can be so wrapped up in what's happening that it's hard to see the wood for the trees. Wondering about God again, because the ride has come to a crunching halt, doesn't actually tell us anything about the reality of faith, just that we can't always see straight or think straight until we actually fall off the bike. In the absence of a crisis, a growing sense of boredom or disillusion seems to catch up with most who attempt to turn life into a kind of ephemeral playground. And living for the weekend can really only be carried off by the young, with their energy and their beauty. And if you're still trying to live it when you're older, this becomes an increasingly difficult look. Either through crisis or process at some point, these sorts of homeless people consider the possibility of God, either for the first time or for the first time in a very long time. Not for any noble reason, but because sometimes there isn't really anywhere else to go if we're really listening to our heart. The son knows that even if he's a servant in his father's house, he'd have a better life than he does now. So he's returning really out of self-preservation. So does this tell us that faith is self-interested, an emotional crutch? Of course it does. Faith in God is not an emotional crutch. It is the emotional crutch if there is a God to believe in. If God is really our true Father, if he really loves us with a passion that is beyond our comprehension or experience, then of course coming home to him brings peace to the mind and comfort to the heart. The real question is faith in God credible at all? Now just imagine that you're the parent of a child who left home one day after a furious row, and you expected her to come back later in the day, trying to sort it out maybe, but after 2 days, you have to face the terrifying fact that she's missing. This is every parent's worst nightmare. And I can tell you, as a parent of 3 kids, that the greatest desire you would have if you were in that position would for that kid to come home. No matter what prompted them to leave, no matter what state they got themselves into, you just want them back. And I really believe that that is how God the Father longs for each of his children to return to him. No matter what prompted them to leave, no matter what they've got up to while they've been away, he just wants them home. Notice that as soon as the first homeless boy appears over the horizon, filthy because of where he's been, the father rushes to embrace him, which tells us that the Father is always watching, always waiting, always hoping for a return. In the ancient Near East, old people did not run. It was undignified. But this long-forgotten father races to the place of a reunion with the homeless stinker. Indeed, there isn't even time for the son's stuttering speech, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you." Apologies cannot be heard above the roar of relief and joy. This son of mine was lost and is found. Let's party. What about the second homeless boy? He lives in the same house as his father, but without ever appearing to be at home with him. His aggrieved protest at the return of his brother seems to make the point. All these years I've worked, slaved for you. You've never once thrown a party for me and my friends. Yet this son of yours comes home, you roll out the red carpet. Where's the justice in that? Some people nod in the direction of God and his love, but are much more interested in working for him or fulfilling their own moral standards, of which they're sure he would approve. By swapping the offer of intimate relationship with God for an exercise in moral or religious performance, we fail to enjoy him and inevitably recreate him in our own image. The average English person has been aptly described as a self-made man who worships his creator. If we won't accept God on his terms, we tend to reduce him to ours. God becomes the kind of guy we think he ought to be, the God of our own creation, quite possibly distant, private, unemotional, crucially unthreatening to anything that's really important to you. I've observed over the years, he may be like austere, frightening, unapproachable in his otherness. He's definitely not somebody you know. He's somebody to keep at arm's length, really. I've observed over the years that those who most shrilly denounce wrong behavior in other people often secretly wish they had the courage to cast off all restraint themselves. But through gritted teeth, they tell themselves there's a moral duty to be performed, a certain standard to be maintained. But they're just as wild at heart, just as far from home. Homeless children of this kind often find it hard to accept that they are actually as needy as those who've run away from home and rolled around in the SHIT. But homelessness is homelessness is homelessness. And you always know when you're not at home. Always. My children are adults now, but thinking back, I think I'd have felt pretty devastated if my son as a young boy insisted on referring to me as sir, kept himself at a distance, never wanted to be touched or told that I loved him. Some of us do our very best to isolate ourselves from the love of God because we can't believe he either could or does love us, or because we don't trust him to do a better job of running our lives than we can, so we don't want to hear it. And this lack of trust often goes back to our relationship with our own Father, where intimacy and trust and kindness haven't necessarily been modeled. And at our very worst, we develop a cold, hard, dead religious veneer in which spiritual form is everything, but true content of the heart is non-existent. That's why I often find myself saying that religion is the height of our rebellion against God. Christianity is not a religion. It's a relationship with God the Father, made possible by the death of God the Son on the cross, and made real in us by the work of God the Holy Spirit in our hearts. I remember going to a fairly knobby do around here a few years ago with a mayor, some city councillors and various other dignitaries, and I was asked several times whether my church was happy clappy. Of course it's happy clappy. Our exuberance, our joy, our celebration, our partying, they reflect a happy clappy God, like the one Jesus speaks of, who rejoices over us with singing, who always believes in us, who's always hopeful about us, who always loves us, and whose love perseveres despite everything. When they were little, my youngest daughter once traumatized the hamster by putting him in a bag on the piano and causing him to fall to his death. My eldest daughter used to scream in quite a whiny way and was quite piercing at times, and my son liked to talk all the way through football matches on the telly. But I was still delighted to call each of them my children, and I still am. And probably for this reason, they feel at home with me today. I just can't get them out of my home, that's the problem. It's not that they are perfect, but it is that I love them anyway. It's not that I'm perfect, of course, but they love me anyway. God is delighted to call every single person in this room his son, his daughter, his child. And he longs for us to feel that we are at home with him despite everything. So if you are currently not at home with him, would you like to be? This talk raises lots of questions. Experience says that we are interested in the big questions of life. Questions like, does life have a meaning more than the meanings that we give it? Is there a God? What happens after we die? Many other big questions. But of course, we lack a context in which to explore these questions properly, other than down the pub, where we definitely achieve all kinds of extraordinary results of our thinking, but we just can't remember any of them the next day. And so we run a course called the Life Course for those who have questions about life and its meaning. The next one starts this Wednesday, spookily. Each evening there is food from 7 o'clock, team brings wine, stimulating presentation hopefully from myself, and an opportunity for small group chit-chat. People choose whether they want to be in a discussion group to explore the big questions, or whether they're simply doing this to integrate into the church because they are Christians. Obviously, the small group discussion is appropriate to the makeup of the group. I anticipate that about 80 people will do the course, the majority of whom do not go to church. So the most difficult thing for them will be coming for the first week. It always is. But once you've actually broken that barrier, what happens is you meet some people who are coming from the same place. They also want to have a chat about things. Many of them do not have a label and don't want one. And basically, we just have a very fruitful conversation about what life is like. We start right at the beginning with no assumptions about God or faith or anything like that. I try to identify what all human beings in secular society like ours do agree about. And we go on from there. We consider science, religion, cancel culture, crystals, all kinds of things. And I also do present Christian claims, but that happens a bit later in the course. We're open to a debate about anything. People can discuss anything that's interesting to them. So once again, the format is food from 7, kicks off at 7:30, presentation, and then small group chat, and it ends by 9. And there are many people who would consider doing something like this, but they're worried that if they do, they'll be sort of hunted down for the rest of their life and end up in some kind of squat, living with other hippies. Basically, if you come once and you don't like it, literally nobody is going to come hunting you down. Okay, I promise you, you'll just come on your own terms. One guy who used to be, who's a member of the clergy, one of the first people I trained, technically he was only around for a year before God called him to New Zealand to start a church. He gave a false name when he came on the life course, and he wouldn't eat the food because he thought it might be poisoned. So just to show you where some people are starting from, so if you think you're anxious, right, you're not Mike. Just saying.